Welcome to Blockchain Recorded, the podcast for the tech curious, where we talk about anything and everything related to the exponentially evolving crypto, blockchain, and Web 3.0 space. Our mission is simple: to share knowledge, facilitate discourse, and help evolve education in blockchain fundamentals, decentralization solutions, and relevant use cases for today's digital economy. We at Blockchain Recorded are not registered investment advisors and do not deal with financial or trading token elements, nor offer any licensed financial services. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only, while the opinions of all parties involved are their own. I'm your host, Nina Cerar, and now let's talk blockchain. Before we begin, this podcast is possible by our sponsor at Ambire. The Ambire wallet is one of the top products in crypto asset management. It is the first open source, non-custodial smart wallet that delivers exceptional user experience combined with solid security. With Ambire Wallet, users can easily navigate the world of Web3. It comes packed with features like built-in swaps, cross-chain bridges, integrated earning opportunities, and more. In addition, Ambire offers things like human-readable transaction parsing, eliminating ERC20 approvals and front-running protection. The smart wallet uses gas abstractions that allow for unique features like paying for gas with stablecoins. Users can batch multiple transactions to save time and gas fees. The wallet also supports NFTs and allows you to connect to any dApp via Wallet Connect. You can use it with an email and password or add hardware wallets or hot wallets as signers to upgrade your security. And the best part, Ambire speaks human. The UI is friendly and informative, ensuring you understand what you're doing and eliminating risks for mistakes. Ambire Wallet users are currently eligible for continuous wallet token rewards. To learn more and get your Ambire account today, visit www.ambire.com. That is AMBIRE.com. So today I speak with Dennison Bertram, the founder of Tally, a DAO operations platform. Tally provides tools for decentralized decision-making and governance for distributed ledger ecosystems. In my conversation with Dennison, we will try to introduce the basics of DAOs and take them further in terms of their role in the Web3 ecosystem, their legal implementations, their tools and use cases, and of course, wherever our DAO conversation takes us along the way. So Dennison, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you for having me, Nina.
You entered crypto well before the Web3 term became a thing. You created a Bitcoin exchange 10 years ago, or a little over 10 years ago, founded various crypto-related projects. So one of them is Tally, like I just mentioned. Yet you're also a renowned fashion and commercial photographer, having shot for some of the world's top brands, if I'm not mistaken. So that's truly fascinating and an eclectic background. So I'm just curious, I know you've spoken a lot about your background and your path, but enlighten us. And I'm just curious, what brought you to Europe and namely the Czech Republic, where you founded the Bitcoin exchange in the OG days?
So that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I came to Europe in the early 2000s because I kind of wanted to change. I was, I just started university. America didn't really feel like the place for me at the time. America still actually looked different. People sort of think that 20 years is not very long, but actually America looked very different. And at the time, I felt like being a person of color, trying to be in tech was very difficult. I mean, frankly, really racist, and I didn't feel like I had time for that shit, to be frank.
Yeah.
So I left because I just wasn't interested in dealing with it, and that was totally the right move. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I left for sort of like greener pastures, and went to the Czech Republic, which at the time was going through a great cultural change still. Right. It had been 10 years after the revolution, but the society had not yet really congealed into what it would be. So it was a great moment of change, and it was just a fascinating experience. All of sort of like Central and Eastern Europe was in flux. Everything was different every day, every year. Everything looked different, and so it was a special time for sure. I like to joke about how back then you can meet someone and make a deal to see them again in like a week or two, and you'd say like 5 p.m. on the corner of this street or that street, and you didn't have cell phones. Mm-hmm. So a week later, you'd just be there, right? Like, it was really fascinating looking
days.
back on not having the internet be like a regular part of your life and living in a different place. So yeah, just a special time. That was, 10 years before Bitcoin came around. So when Bitcoin came around, the world already looked pretty different. So that was sort of like just a different era in and of itself. But the early Bitcoin days were pretty crazy. When I created the exchange in the Czech Republic, it was like monopoly money, and people thought it was just the dumbest thing in the world. So it was very hard. You can imagine that, like, Europe is notoriously difficult to raise startup capital from. So you can imagine how hard it would be to raise startup capital for a business selling monopoly money
10 years ago.
So it was just like a really, really hard time, but people were interested. The people who got it really got it, and were really excited about it. And it was kind of a wild journey.
Was this were you part of a sort of a local just community? Were these like all Czech people, or were you sort of living more of did you have like the expat sort of edge to it?
So there were Czech Bitcoin people.
There were.
There's a guy, Marek, who by the name Slush, he invented pooled mining, which is, when you could mine Bitcoin with like a whole group of other people and you like share the hash power. So there were like some of the critical early Bitcoin and blockchain people in the Czech Republic, but it wasn't a community. It wasn't like it wasn't a community. There were so few of us that we would meet up at sort of like conferences and meetups. There was one in particular in London in 2012, I think.
Okay, so it wasn't in the Czech Republic. You had to go out.
Yeah, there really weren't that many people yet who were into it. Yeah, there wasn't like a big local community, or at least not that I was aware of. And I spent a lot of time at that point. I was spending a lot of time in Italy as well, and there were also some Bitcoin people there. There was a project called Green Wallet, which was very cool actually at the time. So there was an early community, but it wasn't. It was really like reaching out to find other crazy people. It just took a lot of time to like find other crazies.
Cool. Interesting. So the exchange, and then it led you, I guess, eventually to founding Tally. And there was a few projects that you did before that. But before we dive into Tally, because today we're going to focus on DAOs, I know this will be your nth time explaining it. And on previous podcasts, you talk of the concept of DAOs, and obviously for people who are listeners, we have a wide range. So DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations. You talk a lot about how basically they existed pre-crypto, right? So we can argue a DAO is not a crypto thing, but more like a transparent, I would say, governance system getting fine-tuned and more practically implemented through the crypto and digital Web3 economy era, with the value of decentralization at its core. I know you don't like defining DAOs, but maybe let's try to do it in some shape or form, and trying to answer what are they, how do they work today in 2022, and why should we care about them going forward?
Yeah, I think the definition part, again, is hard to do.
Right.
But recently we put on a conference here in New York, DAO NYC, and someone there gave a really kind of interesting take on it. And it went something like a DAO kind of needs at least 2 out of the 3 letters. Maybe it's decentralized and it's autonomous, but it's not entirely an organization, or maybe it's like a decentralized and it's an organization, but maybe it's not autonomous, or maybe it's autonomous and it's an organization, but maybe it's not yet decentralized. I think the probably useful takeaway right now, the sort of like practical definition of what it is it is people who are trying to organize some sort of system to get some sort of thing done, and they don't want to use, or they choose not to use, some other sort of legacy organizational tool, whether it's like the corporation or an LLC or a Facebook group, right? They want to have greater ownership over their organization. They want to be part of this movement. Generally, they want to manage money together in a decentralized way. And the decentralized way of managing money is important because normally if you created an LLC or you created some sort of corporation, one person's name would be on the bank account. Maybe the bank account is in the name of the corporation, but one person at the corporation has the permissions by the bank to take the money in and out. And that's a very important distinction, right? Because if you create a global organization on the internet, in a Discord chat, for example, and in the Discord chat, you say, for example, myself, say, hey, we have a bank account, everybody send your $1,000 to this bank address. Well, even though maybe it's a corporation registered wherever I'm based, you're not really going to feel comfortable about the fact that, you essentially all sent your money to me, right? Because you don't really have any recourse, right? Like, $1,000, it's probably not worth you trying to do some sort of international lawsuit. The bank won't respond to you. So, as a member, you'll have no idea how much money is in there. In that sort of design, it's very hard to trust people, right? It's very hard to build that kind of organization, right? And it's also very expensive to get the money in, right? You're going to pay some sort of international wire fee, and if I run away with the money, there's really nothing you can do. The bank's not going to tell you anything. Right. You don't have any real jurisdiction or any sort of rights to it. But with a DAO, you gain at least the minimum, a kind of transparency, right? Everyone can see, oh, this is how much money we have. It's in this smart contract, right? A big piece of the DAOs today is that you have a smart contract that intermediates this organization, that intermediates the money. And that this account is going to behave according to a certain set of rules around the smart contract. Right. And now some DAOs are more or less decentralized than others. Right. And, I'm sort of looking at the folks that are using multi-sigs instead of token voting. And in those sorts of organizations, the bank account is maybe run by 5 people or, and, you need 3 of them to make an agreement to spend the money. And in this case, folks tend to prefer this to a bank account anyway, because now it's at least 3 people have to agree to rob you, which is 2 more than otherwise. Right. And ideally you can see what's going on. So you know when you're getting robbed, more or less. So that gives people a different sense of security. But then really what you kind of want to get to is ideally the sort of full decentralization where any member of the organization at least has some sort of veto say over how the money is spent, right? Where, either it requires a majority of us to agree to give some money, to spend the money, or it requires some portion of us to disagree. There's these optimistic governance solutions where, one person can say, I'm gonna take $1 million out, and then all the voters can be like, well, no, you're not. We disagree, and they can stop that. Or you can have a situation where all the voters say, yeah, we want to take $1 million out, and then they affect that change together, right? So at the very least, that as a kind of structure when we talk about DAOs from the point of view of this decentralized, transparent control over a treasury, over some amount of money, is really a big change from what's come before, right? Before, we always need the state to define the legal status of an organization. We needed centralized entities like banks to manage the funds of the organization. So by disintermediating those 2 things, we really open up an entirely new kind of category of organization. And an example I like to give pretty often is if you were to create an organization of, 10,000 people in 30 countries managing millions of dollars, that would be a very large corporation, right? Yeah. It would be very expensive to legally incorporate in all 30 countries. For sure. It'd be very expensive to manage a bank account that had, millions of dollars in it. You'd have, some sort of accounting firm, Deloitte or something, managing, auditing the treasury. Yeah. And this thing would take years to put together, right? It would take years to get that paperwork through, be years to organize that.
Sure.
With DAOs, you can build something that large in a matter of hours, right? Like, and it sounds funny, but I've done it personally where, I've had an idea and I'd say, hey, this is what we're going to do. And within hours, you have thousands of people around the world and hundreds of thousands. One project, had Dope Wars had like over $1 million in just, a couple hours.
Right.
And collectively, everyone is building something together that's productive. And they're being paid and they pay one another and they have all these members and, they didn't pay a dime in legal fees, right? And they were able to do it in this really super efficient way. So at the bare minimum, we're talking about organizations that are fundamentally like internet native corporations, but they scale from the tiniest thing, right? It could be 2 people, it could be 1 person. Scales from 1 person to 1 million people with the same base structure to it, right? And that sort of like efficiency of organization is really unprecedented, and that is something that may be lost on some people, but it really is kind of a paradigm shift in terms of what's possible now.
How much are DAO operations truly decentralized, so on-chain? Because we can assume that DAOs mostly use on-chain governance and are financed via sort of tokenization. But how much are they really decentralized? I mean, the communication part is not, right? I mean, most of the DAOs are using Web 2 tools like Discord and stuff like that. That's kind of against the decentralization ethos. Those are sort of some growing pains to go to overcome. But what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is a very young space and it's very new. So sometimes the decentralization argument is pretty interesting, right? Because someone will say, I am going to build this thing. And then they launch it. It's like 12 noon. They like launch it. And they're like, I've made this DAO. And then at like 12:05, someone's just like, that's not decentralized. My mother has never heard of it.
That's the immediate reaction. Yeah.
And I think that that's a really disingenuous reaction, right? Some of these DAOs have been around for a few years and people are like, they're not really fully decentralized. And you're like, well, what does decentralized mean, right? Does it mean the entire world is into your weird hentai NFT project, right? Like a lot of people in the world who are never going to give shit. They'll never vote. They don't want to be a member of your organization, right? So is it not decentralized because you can't get the people who don't care about what you're doing to participate? And that's an interesting point, right? Like who cares about any one particular organization, right? So what does decentralization in that term mean? Some of these DeFi financial protocols, I think Compound is a good example. Compound is pretty frequently dragged by folks who say, well, Compound's not really decentralized. It's mostly run by rich people and a small number of rich people. And my sort of response to that is, well, yeah, but they're the ones who use it, right? Poor people with no money don't actually use Compound, right? Like, this your grandmother or grandfather in Alaska with $5 is not, taking out a loan against their $5 like crypto position to like yield farm comp rewards, right? So something I frequently sort of ask people is, if only the banks participate and the banks know that they can trustlessly interact with one another, is that not decentralized for the banks, right? Like who do these DAOs solve problems for? If Compound is mostly run by rich people, it's also mostly used by rich people. Additionally, those rich people are the ones that kind of provide the energy to that system to operate. So it's not really crazy that they have an outsized voice in how it actually gets run. They also have the most to lose by bad management, right? So these are people who are actually incentivized to be thoughtful participants and care about what's happening, right? If you have $10 million in something, you show up for a vote. People talk about like, most comp holders don't vote. It's just like, well, one guy's got $1 in it and one girl's got like $50 million in it. And people are complaining that a whole bunch of $1 guys don't show up for a vote. Yeah, well, why should they, right? Like what do they even have to lose, right? Like, why, like, in what universe should they spend their precious, like, human life hours researching some sort of weird collateralization safety ratio just for the ego of, like, showing up and voting, right? They've got nothing to lose, right? Meanwhile, Sarah with $10 million in there, she hires an analyst. She thinks about it a lot. She wants to make sure she doesn't lose $10 million. She shows up. She participates in the vote. Sure. So is that decentralized? I think it kind of is.
Sure.
Right? Like, the idea is here is, like, can the people who care, in my opinion, can the people who care trustlessly get something done between one another? Right? And if 5 people care, it's still, in my mind, decentralized between them, right? Because they want to know that their interactions with one another are governed by a system that they understand how disagreements will be settled, right? Ideally, it would be great if 7 billion people, participated in every vote, but it doesn't really make sense because Compound doesn't serve 7 billion people. Now, you have other communities which are much larger, things like Gitcoin or ENS, which, maybe the argument's a little bit different, but it's a little bit different, but it's still kind of same in a certain way, right? Not everyone's really cares. A lot of people participate in these things because, there's a kind of overlap on governance power and money, right? Where, if Jane is really doing a good job running Compound, then Jack with his $5 maybe makes money free. Right? It's free money for him. Jane does a great job. Compound gets more depositors. It gets more usage. People are more excited about comp. Maybe more people participate, or at least more people purchase the token. And then, John, who hasn't been doing anything, his money goes up. And so he's excited. He's happy to be in it. That doesn't mean he knows anything about comp and has any real, like, thoughtful opinion, right? Like, a lot of people come up with these schemes to sort of, like, encourage people to vote, like, sort of like paying people to vote.
That was one of my questions. Yeah.
Yeah, you can certainly pay people to vote. And it's kind of interesting, I think, to think about why you'd pay people to vote. Some people are building really cool futuristic protocols that the US government would gladly put you in jail for the rest of your life for doing, right? And for those kinds of organizations, decentralization in numbers is actually really important, right? If you are decentralized and it's 5 of you, and you feel good because you can play this game with 5 other, like, possibly dangerous people to you, but now you can all play this game together and game theory works out, and how the smart contract will intermediate your money, so you feel comfortable in this room, right? Like, everyone can shoot everybody else, so now you can, like, get something done because everyone's cards are on the table. That's the kind of decentralization that works for you. Great. The U.S. government could just arrest all 5 people, right? Like, that's pretty easy. They'll just come in and be like, yeah, those 5, right? Like, yeah, it's decentralized for you, but it's not really decentralized in the eyes of, like, the government. Where all 5 of you live, we'll just go arrest all of you and good. We'll put you all on trial at once. So for these other protocols, where, maybe the government has an interest in, like, finding you and arresting you, you're really looking for a different kind of decentralization, right? And it's not just like hey, the 5 of us who actually know how this thing works should be the ones who run it, but we actually need a lot more people in this room in case the government shows up to arrest us, right? It's a lot harder to show up to a room and there's 20,000 people there and arrest all of them, right? Now, the government could get away with it probably if it tried hard enough, but that's why some of these protocols they want hundreds of thousands of people in this organization. So that what you can say is like, hey, this is not something that's run by me. You can't arrest me. This is run by all these people. They're all, like, agreeing. No one actually runs it. It's just the software, man. Chill. So in those sorts of situations, there's a kind of regulatory arbitrage that's going on, right? You have a right to put a wild idea out there. And you're kind of trying to build these Pandora boxes, right? Where it's just like, I want to make sure this idea gets out there and the people run it.
Right.
And sometimes these ideas do run organically, right? There are a lot of DAO ideas out there that people get really excited about, and then you have lots of people participating organically. And others of them, they kind of want to jumpstart that process because, there's kind of two arguments here. One is you can get that decentralization by like paying the 10,000 people to show up in that room, right? So distributing responsibility across all these people, which is legitimate. It's a legitimate thing to try and do. The other argument is that you're trying to get these people to have some sort of stake in this, right? That you have a situation where maybe you have these 5 rich people who run this protocol, and they have a lot of money in it, and Jane has 10 million in it, and John has $1 in it. So John never really shows up, and John, you never really get more people, so nobody's participating. Well, the other thing you can do is you can give them stake in the system, right? So you pay them to vote, you give them money, or you give them government's tokens, and now they suddenly have something that they value and they would like to go up and they want to work on. So suddenly, the theory goes, they'll participate, right? So suddenly you have people who didn't have any money in this system, and surprise, now you got money in this system. And maybe a bunch of those people will be like, well, I didn't participate yesterday, but now I'm going to participate. Maybe it's because I'm going to earn money from it, so I'll personally benefit, or because now I have a reason to care. So you can pay people to vote. Sometimes this is very short-sighted, right? Sometimes people get paid to vote and they just instantly sell the tokens you give them and they never come back. Right. But you can design systems that maybe drive a bit more participation. I think it's difficult. It can generally, I think it looks very short-term. But you can design systems that people care about them.
How much of that do you see going on? Like just what you mentioned?
Well, I think yield farming is a form of that. I think yield farming is maybe done for now. Like maybe that's like now that we're in a bear market, maybe that was kind of like the gimmick of the past bull market.
To clean
maybe
itself out, yeah.
Maybe that's not really going to seem so interesting when we come back, right? I think certainly anecdotally, most people just dump their tokens when you give them free voting, right? Like
most people, yeah.
Most people just dump their tokens,
right?
Which is interesting because remember, it's like people are like, oh, they just dump them, and it's just like every sale has a counterpart, right? So it's interesting because somebody's always buying, right? Like people are dumping their tokens, but somebody's buying them too.
Yeah.
So it's maybe a really inefficient mechanism for discovering interest. Right? Like maybe there are parties out there who say, hey, I didn't participate in the building of this protocol. I wasn't early enough. Nobody invited me into the seed round, but I do see the value of this now that I've learned about it. I do care about it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy out the interest of all these individuals who don't care and don't see the value and don't get it. Right? So it can also be a different form of distribution where you don't know who is going to really care, right? So what you do is you sort of flood the market with like cheap membership, and people naturally find, like the network sort of finds the buyer who actually cares. Now, the trouble with that sort of system is some of these buyers are going to care because it's just a profit opportunity, right? And they know how to like sort of corner demand and then like manipulate the market. But other people are genuinely going to say, you know what? Everyone's selling because the bear market. It's the thing that they got tokens for isn't operational yet, but actually I think it's a great idea. And I want to own a lot of this because all these people are selling. They'll be back to like buy back at a higher price. And then they scoop it up and then maybe they get really involved, right? There's certainly a lot of networks out there that do token launches where you're like, well, that's just never going to work. And then sometimes you look at them and you think, oh, that's really fascinating. One project that I think is really fascinating is, and this is not financial advice in any way, but gotta say it.
Yeah.
But looks rare, tried to do this like sort of vampire attack on OpenSea by like paying people looks rare tokens, which accumulate a share of the trading fees of NFTs on their platform. And that brought a lot of wash trading. it brought a lot of people who were just like, trying to mine these tokens through wash trading, which is bad, but it's still this inefficient mechanism for sort of like priming the market, right? And people learn about LooksRare, they know about this protocol. So even when these things are kind of bad ideas, they are maybe just less efficient or very inefficient tools of sort of like naturally finding the sort of like participation base of this kind of organization. So yeah, this has been a really long and winding answer, but purchasing votes generally I don't think works, but you can make an argument that it's better than nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you touched a lot about in there. Also, in terms of maybe some interesting DAO use cases. But before, I wanted to ask: has privacy in online communication been a topic of discussion in the DAO space at all? Just this topic is just relevant and close to our hearts and our podcast team. Recently, I mean, you met before we jumped on this call. My colleague and podcast founder, Tali, he's been developing an on-chain wallet-to-wallet communication platform for over 4 years now and trying to solve this specific problem also for DAOs. Has that been a topic of discussion at all? Like, do you think that DAO communication will move on-chain? Or is that not even a topic of discussion at this point?
So first of all, wallet-to-wallet communication has been around since actually the very beginning of blockchain. Right. The very first Bitcoin client had a messaging system built into it. It was a bad idea for a lot of reasons.
Okay.
And you don't have it anymore because people recognize that as a bad idea. Now, people, of course, continue to build it, or actually, I would say have started building it again because, in the sort of same way that like these technology things kind of go in waves, people lose interest and then people sort of try it again. So there's a lot of people trying it again. You certainly see Etherscan has a kind of like private message feature where, you can send messages to kind of broadcast messages that you could prove are yours. That's kind of like a favorite way of like hackers to communicate with like projects who they've robbed and try and like negotiate some sort of like settlement. Private communication is very important. I think it'll become more important as people sort of start to understand what privacy means.
Right.
Certainly one of the things happening in the United States right now is, abortion. Roe versus Wade, a big legislation thing, has been overturned, which I won't get into, but needless to say, that's some crazy shit.
I can't believe that. Just, yeah.
Crazy shit. And one of the things that now is an issue is that women use these period trackers to like track their fertility and track their periods. And now in these states that want to ban abortions, they want to get access to your period tracker information.
Jesus.
So they can use that against you in case you try and have an abortion.
What?
Right? Which is really fucked up. And I don't know if you can swear on your podcast, but
you can say whatever you want. No, you can say whatever you want. I don't know. I mean, I've been outside of the U.S. for I also left the U.S. in mid 2000s for similar reasons. Maybe just kind of fed up with the U.S. system. But I didn't know this was a thing. Period trackers. Yeah. What?
Yeah. Well, especially if you're tracking fertility. Right?
No. Like, sure, but I know that part. But the latter part, I can't believe that.
Yeah. Well, and for me, I thought. I think it's a great example of how people are always happy to make fun of privacy by saying, well, if you haven't done anything wrong, you don't have anything to be worried about. You're like, well, yeah, actually you do.
Yeah, you do.
Right? Like, because your menstrual cycle is, the government's going to use that against you.
As private as it gets.
Right. And you wouldn't really think that was privacy, but you start to think about all those things like sleep trackers, right? All these things that you thought were so useful about yourself are actually just these enormous honeypots for the government to like impose some sort of like theological law on top of you.
Just to collect information.
Crazy, right?
Yeah.
So privacy is important and it is critically important. For DAOs, is a little bit more complicated. DAOs kind of inherently have a little bit of a struggle here. Right. Constitution DAO was always at a disadvantage for winning the Constitution because it's an open organization and the person they were competing against for the Constitution knew exactly how much money Constitution DAO had and how much they could afford.
Oh, okay.
So it's very difficult for Constitution DAO to effectively win an auction when their counterparty knows exactly how much money they have, right? So their counterparty only needs to bid $1 more and the DAO can't reach it, right? So there's a number of types of operations that are very hard to do when they're completely transparent, right? You can imagine the difficulty a DAO would have in purchasing property when the seller knows exactly how much money they have, right? And like suddenly you can't really negotiate a fair deal because there's an information asymmetry. So you need privacy there, but that privacy is also very difficult because how are you going to both coordinate inside an open organization in public and simultaneously be private, right? So what you end up having is you start to deal with this sort of like cognitive dissonance of private open organizations. Because you can imagine, okay, the DAO maybe is going to empower you and me to buy some property, and we're going to make the decisions of how much we're going to spend for it, right? And in that sort of situation, right, the DAO can't even really say we have a budget, right? Because our opponents know the upper end of the budget. So in that case, it may be you and me, we got to go form an LLC in secret, and then like we got to take the money, and then like we have to appear as the LLC, and then we buy the property as LLC, and they don't know it's the DAO. Private DAO to DAO communication is kind of a weird oxymoron, right? Like it's a public organization on one end, the information goes into a super secret, private, unhackable transmission, and comes out on an open organization on the other end, right? It's a funny thing where you're like, okay, what's the privacy for, right? Like, who cares about intercepting the message in flight if you can freely read it as it goes in and as it comes out, you know? So I assume there are use cases, right? Like maybe you have DAO members who want to communicate with one another, and they do that already. Like big DAOs, they have sort of like shadow coalitions that, you know, they meet up in Telegram groups and they go, oh yeah, let's do this, or oh yeah, let's do that. We'll all vote yes on this, right? And that's normal politics, right? Like people complain about that, but you're not going to get rid of that, right? Like people are like, oh, you have these whales who meet up in these Telegram chats and decide what's going to happen. Yeah, but they could also just meet up in a cafe, right? They could also just be friends. They could also be married, right? They could also just live together in a house and be like, hey, are you voting yes today over breakfast? And the other person's like, yeah, I'm voting yes today. Yeah, I think it's a great idea, right? Let's both vote yes and swing the vote. So you're not going to get rid of that. I would be interested in what private communication looks like. Yeah. But yeah, I'm neither bearish nor bullish on the idea. I'm sort of like neutral, mostly because for DAOs especially, it sounds like it's open on both ends of the network. So.
I mean, that's a fair argument that you're saying it's an oxymoron in itself. I think for the use of, you're trying to be open, transparent, but then you're having this private thing. I think it's more along the lines of just having it be a response to, the Web 2 data being mined and sold, and just for that purpose, right? That that it's truly private. I think it's just not trying to be the product.
I think there's an argument to be said of like, we don't want to use Web 2 products, right? I think it's fair to say, hey, we only want farm-raised organic crypto Web3 technology, and we're not interested in using your like antibiotic-filled,
I love that.
raised in a box Web2 technology. That's fine, right? Like it can be a philosophical choice. This community of people, they don't want to use your thing because they just don't like you and they don't like what you believe in, right? Like, I think a lot of DAOs do not use Parler or these like alt-right neo-Nazi chat group tools because that's not their thing, right? They're like, no, we don't want to be associated with it. We could definitely communicate over it. It's private. That's not our thing. We're not going to support that. We're not going to use it. I think it's difficult for them to really make the case that it's a solid technological argument, right? Yeah, maybe they don't want their chat saved into the Facebook database, but truly there are, negative organizations that will just scrape all of our communications for DAOs anyway, right? And they don't even have to be negative, right? There are positive organizations out there that just have members and there's a big company, they're a great company in the space. And what they do is they actually just hire hundreds of analysts to just hang out in everyone's Discord and take a note about everything they talk about so that they can produce detailed sort of like opinions on what's going on in these communities and summarize them for their sort of like customers, right? Their customers pay them to give them a synopsis of what's happening in DAOs across the space, right? So they actually just hire hundreds of people to go join those Discord communities, go participate just for the sake of like summarizing everything that's talked about. Now that's fine. That's journalism, right? That's reporting, that's trade industry. But you can certainly imagine that, someone could build a business about being kind of malicious and just sort of like going into all these Discords and just like recording everything that gets talked about, recording all the chats, all the community calls for negative purposes or just to archive it, right? Like you could certainly imagine the government does that, right? Like it would be kind of silly for them, if they're trying to arrest all 20,000 people, for them not to be like building a case by recording everyone's chat message. So again, the question is like, do they need to go get a warrant from Facebook to get the chat transcripts, or because they're open organizations, do they just go join and just sit in the crowd, right? So yeah, just I yet to understand how privacy really helps you out there. If the door is open, if you'll tell anyone the secret code, I have a secret code, right? Like,
yeah, no, I mean it's I think it's important to talk about it. I mean, why not?
Sure.
But you mentioned, you talked about the LLC factor before, which kind of brings me to a few questions about DAO legal implications. I listened to a few podcasts where you kind of touch upon that, but you didn't really get into it. And just as a basic question, how can a DAO become legally compliant?
Sure. So it's a hard one to answer.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. Because there's a lot of different kinds of DAOs and there's a lot of different kinds of like legal jurisdictions.
Right.
At the base, what you do is you go create an LLC. And then the operating agreement of the LLC says this LLC is going to do whatever this organization votes to do. Right. At the base, you can do that. Now, there's a lot of things that get complex in here because maybe there's more than one person on this LLC, and then you have to decide how they join. It's very difficult / impossible to say, I have a corporate entity, and anybody who holds this token is a member of it, right? Because you don't know who's holding the token. It's a little bit difficult to like say that this corporate structure actually protects them or that they represent this corporate structure, because you don't know who they are. And they can obtain this token without really having any idea of what that token means. Right? Like generally you kind of have to say, okay, if you do X, that means X, Y, and Z, but if they go purchase it off like Pickle Swap, you kind of make a good argument that they haven't really been bound by any terms, right? Like they don't know. So you can form mini versions of this, right? And what we see happening is like you'll have a big DAO and there'll be people in the DAO who are kind of like worried about just being like exposed. So what they do is they form an LLC and then they say, hey, we are going to do our actions in this DAO via this LLC, right? And that's fine, right? And maybe that's some legal protection. Maybe. I mean, there's a lot of like big question marks, like maybe to some legal protection, right? If the DAO goes and like kills someone or like sponsors terrorism, it doesn't really matter what you've done, right? Like the government will get you anyway. But it becomes very a practical matter for DAOs that like want to do something in the real world, right? And this can be like, I want to buy a building as a DAO. Well, you're going to actually need some sort of like state recognized legal organization to do that, right? And in places like Wyoming, there's a DAO law, so you can have a DAO that has like a legal basis, but you still end up having some like real world things, like a real person who has a driver's license needs to show up and accept mail and pay the taxes and be responsible, right? So you're like, okay, well, not really a complete solution, but you're going to kind of have to do that. A lot of people are like, well, we don't really need that. And I always sort of push back and be like, well, you might just throw a party, right? And somebody trips and falls and they want to sue someone for tripping and falling, right?
Oh, yeah.
You're going to need something that kind of gives you a little bit of legal protection around that, because otherwise DAOs look like unincorporated general partnerships, in which case maybe the government can't arrest all 20,000 of you, but they can find you, Nina, your name is attached to the DAO. So they'll just hold you liable, right? Because in unincorporated general partnerships, everybody has unlimited liability for the actions of everybody else. Right. So that becomes a weird, tricky, dangerous situation, because maybe the government isn't going to come after you. Right. Like if you aren't doing something that seems egregiously bad, maybe the government doesn't care. Right. Like if you are doing some DAO around, I don't know, carbon credits, community, something or other, maybe, the government has limited time, limited resources. They're not going to go after you. You clearly aren't trying to do something really evil. You're working hard. It's not working out. Maybe, it wasn't a great idea. Doesn't seem so criminal. But if your carbon credit has a party and somebody trips and falls, well, maybe that person's lawyer is looking for somebody to go after, right? And for them, they're always looking for somebody to go after. It doesn't really matter, right? They're looking for someone to go after, and they see you. It doesn't matter carbon credits is a good idea and you like eat organic and you believe in good things and all that jazz. They're looking for somebody to hold responsible for and get money out of, right? And in that case, having an LLC or organization is very important, because they're going to go after somebody, right? So in those cases, DAOs, and again, this is a very American-centric view.
I was just going to say, I've been outside the U.S. too long to think that there's already, sorry to cut you off, but the automatic lawyer have to be backed by something. Yeah, it's very U.S.-centric, but no,
it is.
It's fair. I mean,
it's U.S.-centric. In the trip and fall example.
Yeah.
But this also exists for the case for money anywhere, right? Like you have a financial protocol, and there's a great moral ethical question thing where they there's a train track, right? And there's a out of control train running down a train track, and if it goes straight, it'll like run over and kill like 10 people. But if you pull the lever and it goes to the right to a different track, it'll run over and kill only one person. And now you have to make the decision, are you going to kill one person or you're going to kill 9 people, right? And then, the argument generally is that it's much better to, the switch and have one person killed rather than, these 9 people killed. But, and so let's say, in a financial protocol, right, maybe the argument is if we let this system run the way it's running, 99.9% or 99 out of our 100 members are going to lose all their money. But if we switch the switch over here, only one person in this community loses all their money, right? Well, that one person's going to be pissed, right? And they even, in Europe and other places that aren't as litigious as America, are going to sue because you did take an action that caused them to lose all their money. Now, it doesn't really matter that maybe that's in the benefit of the larger organization. You still took an action that caused them to lose their money, and they can hold you responsible for that, right? And in a court, and now I'm not a lawyer and this is not legal advice, in a court, you may have trouble, if the argument is scoped really narrowly to, did your action or did your action not cause this person to lose all of their money? The fact that maybe it was necessary for the safety or the health of the entire thing might be irrelevant in the context of that specific case or discussion, right? The case may be did you take an action that caused this person to lose all this money? And the answer there may be, yes, you did. And you may then be held responsible for that loss. So it really depends a lot on what your organization is doing. But if there is someone aggrieved enough, right? Generally, we're not really worried about the state unless you're doing something wrong, right?
Cool. Okay. I think we've sort of covered that part. Let's talk about Tally. We haven't gotten to Tally yet. So we're talking about an sort of all-in-one platform that builds governance infrastructure for DAOs, essentially an on-chain governance tool, right? So am I saying this correctly? Sort of Tally is the go-to place to start a decentralized community and using tools to vote, propose within, and et cetera, et cetera. Can you take us through Tally and also where it is today in terms of the tools it provides?
Yeah, so we like to talk about Tally as being a place where you can like start, join, and grow decentralized organization. We are the front end for a lot of the large DAOs, Gitcoin, ENS, Compound, Uniswap,
Right.
many more. And we believe right now we focus on-chain governance. We'll expand to off-chain communities in the near future. But this is a real place where you would go to create an organization and grow it, right? DAOs start as an idea, right? I want to buy ice cream DAO, right? Today is just me. You can come to Tally, you can start ice cream DAO, and now you have kind of like a seed that can grow. And you can use Tally to as more people join, do delegations, allow people to see who are the other members of Ice Cream DAO, get more involved in Ice Cream DAO. Then you can raise some money that goes into your on-chain governance, and you can see that on Tally, and then you can vote on how to spend it, and then your community can grow. So Tally is really a tool that allows you to like manage and run an organization, because organizations are really opaque, for very hard to understand what's going on. DAO tooling is very new, it's very mature. So there's a lot of like needs that people have, and Tally really addresses those, right? Now we support kind of specific kinds of DAOs today, but we're growing as well. So we start to support more. But it's things like NFT DAOs. You can work on Dope Wars, Nouns DAO, Pride Punks DAOs. Some of these DAOs. I actually created Dope Wars and Pride Punks.
Right.
Dope Wars is a real success. It's a real big community of people who are just like doing all sorts of amazing stuff.
Yeah, that's
amazing. It's really wild.
How it took off.
Yeah, it really took off. You can participate in Nouns DAO and Lil Nouns DAO. And these organizations have other governance tools, but a lot of people like to interact with them through Tally. So those are like NFT DAOs. You can participate in regular ERC20 style DAOs like Gitcoin and ENS, where, this is an example of, there are some small DAOs on Tally, niche communities. There's a DAO called Femboy DAO, which is very interesting. I had to look up what Femboy means.
I was just going to ask, yeah.
I'll leave it to the viewer to do the Googling on that. But they have a community and they have a whole bunch of money and they manage it together on Tally, which is, wild, and that's cool. We don't take opinions as to like what people kind of want to organize around, but it's a small community. And then some communities are enormous, right? Like Gitcoin or Uniswap. They have enormous communities and their votes have enormous turnouts. Faye and Rary are on Tally, and they have really contentious and frequent votes. So people use Tally to do a lot of things.
Regarding Tally's voting framework, how does it compare with Snapshot, for example? And for listeners who are not familiar, Snapshot is a decentralized voting system that allows users to create proposals and vote off-chain. How would you? I mean, does anyone ask you this, or could you?
Sure.
Could you even compare it?
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, I'll have to correct you there.
Okay.
Snapshot is awesome, but it's not decentralized. All of Snapshot happens on their server.
Right.
If they were to turn off their server, everything is gone. If they were to alter their server, they could alter the outcome of your vote and you would never know it.
Okay.
Right. So Snapshot is not a decentralized tool. Snapshot is trying to build a decentralized service, but up to today is not decentralized. So there isn't an enormous difference between running a vote today on Snapshot and running a vote on Facebook groups, right? It just depends on, do you trust Snapshot more than you trust Mark Zuckerberg? Now, personally, I would definitely trust Snapshot more than Mark Zuckerberg. But the point here is that it's not decentralization.
Okay.
It's also not decentralized because when you vote on Snapshot, it is a kind of poll. right? So let's say we make a vote on Snapshot, which is we're going to sell Nina's house to Dennison. And everybody votes yes. Nina is going to sell her house to Dennison. Now what? Do you want to sell your house to me? No.
Okay.
Is there any way I can force you to sell your house to me? No.
No.
Right? So what happens, and this happens a lot with Snapshot, and this is actually really unfortunate because a lot of people have this misunderstanding that they think it's a decentralized tool. And it has allowed a lot of malicious participants in the ecosystem to hide behind the word DAO when really their organization is no such thing, right? Many of the big financial, not many, but there's a couple big financial protocols that are very famous and very community oriented that use Snapshot, but have a track record of just simply ignoring the voters, right? Yes, you vote on Snapshot. It says we should pay the CEO $100,000 instead of $1 million. CEO is the one who implements it, just ignores it, right? And the community votes again and says, "Hey, we vote that all the Snapshot proposals should be implemented." Team ignores it again, right? So what this is it is it's deception, and it is a kind of manipulation, right? There's a famous quote from Henry Ford, which is, "The Model T comes in any color you want as long as it's black." And off-chain polling solutions are exactly that.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
That's a good way.
You can vote for anything you want as long as it's what we want you to vote for. And if it's not, we're just not going to respond to your message. That's it. We're not going to do anything. Right? So there's a lot of DAOs who use that because, it's free to vote. Of course it's free to vote, right? Like writing your name down on a piece of paper is entirely free, right? Like saying yes in a Discord chat is entirely free. That's why it's free. Right. So people use it because it's free, but it's not decentralized, which is very interesting because a lot of people don't actually care about the decentralization until, of course, the people who run these projects take all your money, right? Which we've seen over and over and over again. Right. So you have these big projects in the space. I think like Wonderland Finance is a great example where like finally Daniele had this famous Discord message where he says, "Enough, I'm going to run the DAO now."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, got it. And people started making the joke saying like DAO stands for Daniele, autocratic.
Yeah. Right? Centralized.
So, there are some tools that try and bridge, quote unquote, trustlessly the outcome of a Snapshot proposal to on-chain. These are tools like reality.eth. We have also, this is also kind of a feint, because reality.eth uses this sort of like challenge system to enforce a vote. And actually, someone recently did this in practice to demonstrate the sort of vulnerability here. We've talked about this vulnerability for a long time. We haven't done it in practice because Tally would be viewed very negatively if we did something specifically to point this out. So we try and tell people. But the way that the challenge methods exist to bridge off-chain decisions on chains is a kind of game theory, right? The idea here is if you are right, you should be able to raise more money to prove that you're right, right? So if the decision says, we are going to do X, and I put up a bond of $100 that says X is correct, somebody else can put up a bond of $200 saying Y is correct, right? Now I have to put up a bond of $400 to say X is correct. And that concept here is that because the majority of us know that X is correct, that's kind of like a Schelling point for which side of this argument we're going to be on. Because if we're right, we get to take the other side's money, right? So there's a profit motivation for us to keep on piling in on the right answer because we get the other side's stake, right? Because the other side loses. If you put up money for a bad answer and we can prove that you're wrong, and by prove we can, i.e. we get more money on the other side, we'll get your money. So now there's a profit opportunity. So now there's like this game theory thing, which should ideally result in only right answers getting transmitted, because we can assume that the right answer will always be a greater Schelling point for capital because it's obvious. Problem with this is twofold: attention and planning, right? This game only happens for so long. So if nobody's paying attention, right? If nobody's paying attention, then there's nobody to put up the money on the other side, right? So you say X is $100. Great. But what if I just show up and say like, ooh, let's do Y. Here's $200. And nobody notices. So nobody shows up to put up $400, right? Well, then Y goes through. Now, you can go even more malicious and you can say, let's say you have a protocol worth $100 million, $100 billion, let's say, right? That doesn't matter. 100 million, then zeros are irrelevant, right? $100 million. But the $1 billion is more fun. So let's do that.
That's
$100 billion. If a malicious decision will destroy 90% of the value of that organization, right? So a malicious decision goes through, and now the protocol worth 100 billion is reduced to being worth only 10 billion, right? Could you raise $9 billion to capture $1 billion, right? And what I mean by that is you can have a bad decision and you can immediately go and you can say, here is $9 billion on this bad decision, right? And let's say you time it well too. So let's say that you do this Christmas morning, right? So Christmas morning, you show up and you say, bad decision, $9 billion. Now, to stop this bad decision from going through, on Christmas morning, the good guys out of nowhere, surprise, surprise, have to come up with $18 billion, right? And you can imagine that could be hard to do. Even though you're right, it could be hard to raise $18 billion unexpectedly in poor timing, especially if there's some sort of accompanying fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the Discord group and in the Telegram, people not sure what's going on, right? So you can coordinate something like that, and then it becomes not very difficult to capture organizations with these sort of trust games, right? So the reason why we have been so strong on-chain governance, and in particular, Open Zeppelin Governor, which was originally created by Compound, but now standardized in the Open Zeppelin library, is that you don't have to worry about those games. The decision is the people voted, their decision is final. You don't have to ask the CEO to implement it. You don't have to ask Nina to sell her house, right? And ask Nina nicely, right? The smart contract is the ultimate authority over the funds, over the protocol, over the decision-making. And the voters are the ultimate authority over how that smart contract operates, right? So in that case, what we have is an organization that's actually decentralized and autonomous, right? Where every participant knows what's going to happen. If they vote for a red car, they get a red car. Doesn't matter that the team only believes in black cars, right? Now, of course, the vote has to be something that smart contracts actually interact with, right? But that is a very different kind of organization, right? And there's a good reason why organizations use tools like Snapshot or other polling tools to get an opinion, right? They want to know how people think and feel about things. But then they execute that decision on chain, right? Because otherwise it's not really decentralized. It's not really autonomous, right? It's any color you want as long as it's black.
Right. You've alluded to a lot of use cases or names and throughout this conversation, but in your opinion, which DAO would you consider, or DAOs, to be most successful, and why?
I think it's too early to make that claim.
Okay.
They didn't all start at the same time.
True.
They don't all have the same level of difficulty in their challenge.
True.
Right.
Maybe the ones that have been around for longer, or that you maybe keep going. Do you have one that you go back to that you think about?
Yeah, I think Compound has been successful. I think there are some people who maybe feel a little frustrated with it today, but it has been successful. Something I think about DAOs is that they don't have to last forever. They certainly could. Something in that efficiency that I spoke about at the beginning of the program, where you could create an organization in a couple hours.
Right.
The organization may only last a couple hours, right? Imagine building a corporation in 30 countries with 10,000 people and millions of dollars that lasts for 2 days. Impossible to do, right? But when DAOs, you could do it. After 2 days, you bought whatever you wanted to buy. Didn't work out. Constitution DAO disbanded. Everyone goes home.
Yeah, Constitution DAO.
Right?
Keep coming back to that one.
Right, but why not? Right, LLCs don't exist forever. Corporations don't exist forever. Right.
True.
So I think sometimes people have a strange idea in their head that these should be eternal organizations, which doesn't really, in my mind, make sense. Right. You made a lemonade stand to sell lemonade on a Thursday. That's it. Right. You didn't actually want to live for lemonade for the rest of your life. Organizations may try and do one thing and they go away. The cool thing about on-chain organizations is that maybe they do something, they go away, but really the smart contracts, they're just waiting for some day in the future where somebody cares again. It almost becomes these like ancient magic spells, in these like superhero movies, they always find some like ancient tomb, right? And somehow the magic is still alive and like it's just waiting for someone to come in and like pick up the magic goblet or something, right? Yeah. Smart contracts are kind of like that, right? So these DAOs, the autonomous part is they don't need us to be there every day doing something, but when we need them, they'll be there for us, right? And that's pretty magical, I think. I think there's a lot of DAOs doing really ambitious ideas, right? There's DAOs trying to affect climate change. Real people in the real world with a lot of money have trouble making impact on climate change, right? But maybe the effect of these DAOs is, there's that sort of phrase, it's the friends we make along the way. Right. Maybe a lot of these DAOs, it's not relevant if they actually ever achieve what they're doing. Maybe the greater purpose is that they actually onboard and folks to Web3. There's this organization, Cerar. They're an LGBTQ plus organization, an NFT DAO. They were at DAO NYC and they're talking to us about their launch, and something like 60% of Cerar members didn't have a wallet when they went to mint the NFT. So Cerar had to like tell them about crypto, tell them about a wallet, show them how to get the money, go sign up on Coinbase, get it in there so they could like purchase a membership to Cerar. Right?
Interesting.
So Cerar is doing two things, right? It's trying to tackle its core goals and mission statement, but really it's also onboarding people to Web3. So if Cerar doesn't work, and I hope it does, but if it doesn't work, it will still have accomplished some other goal, right? So it's very difficult for me to, people want to say, what is the most successful DAO? Right. And it's kind of like saying, what is the most wonderful company, right? Like maybe Apple's the richest company, but there's this company, King Arthur flour here in the United States. It's a very famous flour. They have like the crest of King Arthur on it. And King Arthur's flour is a benefit corporation. So it is actually owned by all the people who work there, right? So King Arthur does not have nearly as much money as Apple, right? Like they just make flour, right? But what it does have is every single person who works at King Arthur owns King Arthur. And together they make flour. And to make more money, they come up with new recipes and they try and show people how to bake more bread and bake more pies. And if you're going to say which company is more wonderful, maybe it's King Arthur, right? Like a lot of people wake up in the morning, they eat bread that came from flour, from King Arthur flour, and it's delicious. They feed their babies with baked goods that came from King Arthur flour. These people live lives making flour so people can bake goods, right? Like maybe in the great scheme of things, like that is a more wonderful company, right? So it's very difficult, I think, to answer the question of like, what is the best DAO? Because what is best, right? Like Uniswap has the most money, true. But maybe the fewest decisions, right? Yeah. Like it's very hard to say. It's
just more of a, it's very much a relative concept. It's just more of like do's and don'ts, right? Or successful, what has gone wrong, what has not gone wrong.
Sure. I think Wonderland Finance is a great example.
Which one?
Don't be a fake DAO. Wonderland Finance.
Oh, Wonderland Finance, yeah.
Right? Like, don't be a fake DAO. Don't lie to people.
That's a pretty obvious one, yeah.
It's just me now running the DAO, right? That's not DAO.
Don't do that.
Right? Don't do that, right? If you're going to use some off-chain voting mechanism, right, tell people honestly, if you vote for something we don't agree with, we're not going to do it, right? Don't sort of like just wait for every vote to pass and go, whew, they agreed with us again. Good thing we didn't have to rug them, like, don't sit around being like, well, if we disagree, we'll just rug them,
Yeah.
You shouldn't lie to people. These DAOs should be honest. Right. Like if you can't be fully decentralized, you say that you can't be fully decentralized, right? If it's risky, not audited, not proven, say that.
Right.
I do think that now there are some problems growing with contributors in DAOs. That's not something that we really touched on.
No, I wanted to actually ask you because I did hear, it was one of a more recent podcast. You did say that you spent some time thinking about that one in terms of malicious or non-trustworthy contributors that are there for the wrong reasons.
It's interesting. We build smart contracts with the assumption that they exist in an antagonistic, dangerous space where everyone should be assumed to be malicious.
Guilty.
And then the Discord group that we build on top of that, we kind of assume the opposite because we're polite. We sort of assume that all the members are really great, wonderful people, which is a little bit nonsensical because those are the same people who would be doing terrible things with our smart contracts, right? The smart contracts don't have autonomy. And I think communities have to keep in mind that not all of their members are there for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Right. There are plenty of people in the world who are malicious. There's plenty of people in the world who love doing mean things or trying to capture DAOs or steal money. We see a lot of these horror stories of hacks are very long con type of scams where people just work on a community for a long time. Yeah. They contribute, they help out, they participate with like an end goal of drugging everybody or robbing them. And this is a problem. Other thing we have is in the earlier days of crypto, and this is just sort of like depends, right? Like one of the things that has been wonderful about Ethereum is that Vitalik made a lot of effort to make sure that everyone felt welcome in the community. And the community has gotten a lot bigger than just Vitalik. The community is so large, a lot of people don't know who even he is.
Yeah, I can't believe that, but yeah.
Right. But, you know, there was a great tweet some time ago where someone was talking about Vitalik and someone responded like, who the fuck is Vitalik? Right. What are you talking about? I wish I could source that because it was so funny, but, you know, I'm sure we could find it. So what happens is now people, you know, when you have some sort of protocol and you just give people money, right? And you just say, hey, if you ever use this service, you just get money. You can attract the attention of people who would never have shown up because they liked your community or you liked your idea, right? They only showed up because somehow now they had money and maybe there's some opportunity. And you have communities that deal with negative energy individuals. And you have now situations where people deal with harassment. I've dealt with this myself in DAOs.
Really?
And now in some of the larger DAOs, I'm not going to name folks, people actually go through the effort to like harass these people in person. They'll go to conferences just to find them and harass them in real life.
Wow.
And this is very bad.
That's crappy.
Very bad, right?
Has that happened to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Oh my God. It's really ridiculous. You know, people on the internet have a weird sense of entitlement.
Yeah, well, that's the never-ending problem. Yeah.
And that for a lot of DAOs can be very difficult, right? Because you have DAOs where people are like, why haven't you made me rich yet? And people are like, well, we're working on some sort of cool idea. And people are like, fuck the idea, pump my bags.
Yeah, when Lambo.
Yeah, right. And that is unfortunately, like, that's one of the reasons where a lot of like sort of older folks are really excited about the bear market because all these people that like showed up just for money and Lambos go home for a while. Like this is something we know about bear markets, right? Like at the top of the bull, everyone's like one Lando or bottle service in the club, blah, 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 blah. And then token price goes down and they go back to doing what they were doing. And we can go back to like building things and thinking thoughtfully about problems. But communities do have to deal with that. And that is really hard. And that is something that we need to figure out a better way of dealing with. Maybe that is where privacy messaging comes in. But open communities that have no enforcement mechanism against other community members can be very fragile when it comes to the experience of the members and the community health. You know, I put out a Medium post a while ago now about like the invisible work of community, how builders leave projects, not because they're done with it, because they're just tired of the abuse, right? Like you see in projects where people build things, you know, I know, you know, for example, Dope Wars went through this for a little while where people are like, I have an idea. Why aren't the devs building this? And it's like, well, there are no devs. Everybody here is just like here because they're excited about it and they want to build things together and everyone's building the thing that they like. People are like, well, I'm not a dev and they should go build this. And it's just like, well, that's not how this community works. But you actually spend a lot of time. There's this great tweet about, I love using this image over and over. It's called the soft fudder, right? FUD is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And like people get accused for spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt when they say, oh my God, they make up some sort of lie as to why the token price is going to go down, and people call them fudders.
Oh, the fun of Telegram groups, yeah.
Yeah. But there's a funny idea called the soft fudder, which are people who say, not to FUD, but they say something that's very, very difficult. And they're like, just asking questions, just curious, right?
The incognito
but people
one.
can actually harass the community by just asking sort of vaguely antagonistic, weird questions over and over and over and over again, right? There's a lot of ways to derail positive communities because there's a lot of members, like positive people generally don't really like to spend their energy on non-positive people. Right. So you have communities that suffer where the people who are really into it leave because they actually have other things they can do with their life and they're not interested in just losing their time with like negative individuals, right? So that's a big failure mode for DAOs and communities. And that's where we need a lot of tooling, personally, in my opinion, so that you don't have to like have other humans bear the brunt of negative people, right? In the Pride Punk DAO, we deal with people who come in just to like spew racist or homophobic remarks. Maybe they think it's funny because wherever they live, they're just going to like show up in your community and just like do this. And members of the community have to like go through reading this stuff, right? And a lot of them try to be polite and they have to go through debating people about like other people's rights to exist or what the purpose of the community is. And that extracts a lot of enthusiasm from individuals, which long term is net negative for communities because you're not interested in participating in a community where like, most of your time is spent, just being a lightning rod for like people who really don't care that they are negative.
No, it's completely counterproductive. Yeah.
Completely counterproductive, right? So, that is something that communities really have to work on. And unfortunately, we don't have great tools for that, right? And, there's a joke I make pretty frequently is, most of the time we build DAOs using tools called Discord. And Discord literally means people not getting along, people disagreeing, people being unhappy, people arguing with one another. It's, a discordant community is not a successful community. So it's like very ironic that, we use a tool that is actually named after that. And you kind of wonder if that's actually the business model, right?
Yeah. I've seen that in terms of not just in DAOs, I mean, just in general. So the role of even community managers, it can get pretty stressful, right? In terms of how to deal with negativity and, like you said, the soft fudders, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I'll try to wrap this up. Does the current crypto winter affect your DAOing in Tally, would you say? Or from the previous?
No,
not
particularly. Hopefully it gets easier to build.
And in a more clean, positive way.
More clean, less noise way.
Right.
I think crypto winter is going to be good for us. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to just being able to like focus and ignore like people who maybe just aren't interested in the sort of like more productive aspects of crypto. But yeah, for us, it doesn't really change anything. I've been here 10 years plus now.
Yeah, sort of immune to everything.
Yeah, it's just like part of the ride. You go up a bit, you go down a bit, You go up a bit, you go down a bit, Yeah. That's how it is.
But through this time, I think it's important just to have the discourse and the conversations to go forward. I actually came across your DAO Talk podcast. You have a few episodes on, I think I came across it on Spotify, started in May, right? Yep. So I see that you are embracing the education aspect. I think it's very cool. What would you like to see go forward in the DAO space besides the malicious bad actor trying to figure out tools for that?
I would like to see more real world application of DAOs. LLCs are very heavy, even though they're lightweight. I would like to see more local DAOs. You know, people are like, oh, well, this DAO, you know, it's really amazing that this DAO can service the people in, you know, around the world, but wouldn't it be cool if it just serviced like people in your neighborhood, right? I would like to see more DAOs, really. More DAOs is like what I want to see. I want to see people building DAOs instead of NGOs, building DAOs instead of nonprofits. So yeah, I want to see more DAOs.
Just in terms of the LLC component, just a quick question: do you see that most DAO contributors, or would you say even workers at this point for some DAOs, are they more or less? This is for the U.S. probably that you can speak to. Are they more or less self-employed? I mean, can we assume that there's just some sort of subcontractors and not employees at this point?
I don't know. That's kind of hard to.
Okay.
I don't know if I could really.
You cannot answer that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really know.
Are there, Dennison, this has been a very cool talk, sort of covering different aspects while you have the New York sirens going in the background. This is kind of like the sign to maybe end it. But is there anything that I haven't asked you that maybe you wanted to conclude with?
No, not particularly.
We've kind of covered.
You did a great job. It's pretty thorough. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned DAO Talk. It's a weekly podcast on Spotify.
Yep.
I'm sure you will link to it in this episode so people can go check that out.
I was just going to say, definitely. We'll be in the show notes. Yeah.
We have our website, tally.xyz, where you can go and check out all the DAOs on Tally, where you can create your own DAO, add your DAO to Tally. We have our Twitter, which is pretty cool. We just wrapped up DAO NYC, which is probably one of the coolest DAO conferences that has occurred in New York City.
Yeah. Are there any valuable?
It was a real success.
Yeah. Were there valuable takeaways from that? You can maybe share with us.
Yeah. A lot of people are building DAOs.
Okay.
In particular in New York City, DAO NYC. An enormous number of people are building DAOs. People are really excited about DAOs, and DAOs are actually big enough to support having their own specific conference. It was really well attended, really fantastic event. I think that's just love people to like connect with us and follow us and make DAOs.
That's awesome. Dennison, thank you so much. I know you're a little under the weather, so I'll let you go so you can recuperate after.
Thank you.
After this long conversation. So with that in mind, so I'll borrow one of your quotes again to sort of end our talk here. So start, join, and grow decentralized organizations, right? Find a DAO, add a DAO, just DAO.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Dennison, thanks so much.
All right, thank you.
Thanks again to our guest, as well as thank you everyone for listening. Thank you also to the Baria music team for providing their music. You can check out their latest album on bariamusic.com. You can find all supporting information on our website, blockchainrecorded.com, and listen to us on Google, Apple, and Amazon podcasts, as well as Spotify, Radio Public, and Stitcher. Stay healthy and tuned for our next episode.